Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales. Chapter 49-34. What does this mean? It's not a test of team survival, but a test of speed? Yuhan's expression darkened as he looked at the situation around him. All three teams are facing off against three statues at the same time. Does that mean the team that takes care of their opponents first will get the reward first? That's possible. Since the statues have weaknesses, let's not waste time. Let's just attack. Quan Tianqing swallowed a recovery pill. Then, the star god projection glowed brightly again. Starlight flowed around its body, and it seemed to be eager to give it a try. Don't be anxious. These statues seem to be different from the ones before. Kang Xinmu stopped Quan Tianqing from attacking. After careful observation, he said, these three statues seem to be connected to each other. It's not as simple as we think. It seems like there are a total of 15 weaknesses on the three statues. These weaknesses are in a sequence. In other words, we have to attack these weaknesses in a sequence? Gu Xingyue narrowed her eyes and guessed, how do we find the sequence of these weaknesses? I can't see the complete sequence at all. I can only see three blinking dots here. What about you guys? Jiang Shenwu roughly described the positions of the three weak points that he saw in Blink. I can see that the three weaknesses of the flickering are different from yours. Suyi immediately noticed something strange. After a quick comparison, the five of them found that the weaknesses of the flickering were different from the others. In other words, there were exactly 15 weaknesses in total. Then what was the sequence? In fact, this was also Kang Xinmu's guess. However, it wasn't a random guess. It was a guess given by the demon god ancestor. After all, the demon god ancestor's understanding of these ruins definitely surpassed that of ordinary people. Since he mentioned this possibility, then Kang Xinmu had to consider this possibility. And the facts proved that it really was as the demon god ancestor said. They had to attack the 15 weaknesses of the three statues in a sequence. Most importantly, the three statues had spatial power. With the help of the space attribute, the three statues constantly changed positions, and they would occasionally hide in the void. Then, he launched an attack at the five people. Almost at the same time, without giving the crowd any more time, the 9 human-shaped statues immediately launched a violent attack on the members of the three teams. Furthermore, the three statues in each region seemed to have some sort of effect on each other. When they combined their powers to launch an attack, they could kill anyone. Anyone who was struck by their spatial attribute attacks would only be able to die. On Kang Xinmu's side of the battlefield, the five of them spread out and observed the surroundings. Yuhan soon discovered something. I think I know how to determine the order in which to attack these weaknesses. Each of us can see three weak points. Although we don't know the principle, if you carefully sense it, these three weak points are actually different. Among my three weaknesses, 7, 8, and 13 beams of spatial light are gathered together. If I'm not wrong, the order in which we see the weaknesses is calculated according to the number of spatial light beams? This required an unparalleled spatial perception ability. This ability was much more demanding than the previous ability to sense spatial vortexes. This was because every spatial light beam was gathered together and almost merged into one, making it difficult to distinguish them. Even Kang Xinmu could barely sense the three weak points he could see. One of them was the condensation of one spatial light beam, another was the condensation of 9 spatial light beams, and the last one was the condensation of 15 spatial light beams. If there were more, Kang Xinmu might not be able to accurately detect them. Fortunately, there were at most 15 spatial light beams this time, right? Kang Xinmu's perception of the power of the void was extremely strong. After all, he had devoured supreme spatial power. One could imagine how difficult it would be to determine the number of spatial light beams. Oh no! I see a weak point here. I don't know how many spatial light beams are gathered together, but I'm sure there are more than 10. Quan Tianqing suddenly felt a little uncomfortable. His spatial perception ability was obviously not as good as Kang Xinmu's and Yu Han's. If everyone could not accurately sense the number of spatial light beams they saw, then they would not be able to accurately determine the order in which to attack the weak points, and they would not be able to destroy the 3 statues. This meant that the entire operation would fail. According to the situation we have now, this should be the way to destroy these 3 statues. Yu Han did not argue with Quan Tianqing. This kind of spatial perception was purely based on perception, so there was no way to train it. Therefore, he directly asked Su Yi and Gu Xinyue, "Can you two accurately sense the number of spatial light beams you see?" "I have 2, 10, and 11 here," Su Yi quickly said. 3, 6, 14. Gu Xinyue said it in a relaxed manner. It seemed that her perception of spatial force was still very sharp. In this case, the number that Quan Tianqing could not sense was definitely the condensation of 12 spatial light beams. Now it's clear. "Start with Kang Xinmu, attack," Yu Han said in a deep voice. This was an attempt. After all, what Kang Xinmu said was only a possibility. What if he did not use this method to deal with the 3 statues? The 3 statues had now joined forces and constantly attacked the 5 people. The target of the attack was constantly changing, but no matter what, the 3 statues always attacked the same person. They combined with each other, their power fused, and their figures constantly flickered in the space, making it difficult to see through them. Their attacks were extremely fierce. Once hit by the 3 statues' attack, the result would be death. Kang Xinmu could only see the weak point formed by 1 light beam. He directly used the wind shadow flowing cloud flash to pass through the void and appear next to the statue. The 9th extreme dragon burst out. A terrifying power instantly exploded, and the 9th extreme dragon burst accurately bombarded the weak point that Kang Xinmu saw. Chapter 49-35. Kang Xinmu immediately sensed that something was wrong. At this moment, the 3 statues shuttled through the void and surrounded Kang Xinmu's black dragon body. Then, boundless spatial power condensed and locked Kang Xinmu's black dragon body in this space. He couldn't escape. Kang Xinmu tried to use any methods, but no matter what defensive method or method of shuttling through the void, he couldn't use any at this moment. "Hurry up, who's the second one? Don't stop. We have to erupt as fast as possible." Kang Xinmu immediately reacted. This was likely a test where they had to quickly break through the weak point. If they were a step slower, the person who broke through the weak point would face death. This was a test that couldn't fail, and it especially tested everyone's reaction speed. Fortunately, after understanding the rules, everyone's reaction speed was still very fast. After Kang Xinmu, Su Yi was the one who could see the weak point of the 2 spatial light beams. When Kang Xinmu reminded her, Su Yi immediately moved. She exploded with the 16-winged demonic god's super-powerful martial technique towards the weak point that only she could see, shattering it in one wave. Then, just as Kang Xinmu expected, the 3 statues almost immediately surrounded Su Yi. The tyrannical and terrifying spatial power continued to condense, and this continued to condense according to the previous degree of condensation. In other words, the 3 statues' first attack would start from the moment they broke through the first weak point. This required them to break through the weak point in an extremely short amount of time. They couldn't let the 3 statues launch even a single attack. After Su Yi broke through the second weak point, Kang Xinmu felt the space around him loosen up and he directly regained his ability to move. "Hurry, the 3rd weak point," Gu Xinyue directly made her move. Although it was the Nightmare Mirage Dragon, her abilities were extremely strong. It was easy for her to attack a weak point now. However, before she could make her move, Kang Xinmu suddenly thought of something that he had overlooked earlier, and that was, there were still a few people among them who could see consecutive weak points. For example, Suyi was ranked 10th and 11th, Yuhan was ranked 7th and 8th, and Quan Tianxing was ranked 4th and 5th. If he were to break through the previous weak point, he would be locked in place and unable to move, for example, Quan Tianxing. Once he broke through the 4th weak point, who would break through the 5th weak point? These weaknesses could only be breached by the people they could see. No one else could attack them. This point was almost certain. Therefore, this was what Kang Xinmu suddenly thought of. However, this wasn't too difficult to solve. They just had to be prepared in advance. Quan Tianxing, attack me with all your strength now. Kang Xinmu roared at Quan Tianxing. At this time, Quan Tianxing was preparing to attack the 4th weak point, which was when Gu Xinyue attacked. Quan Tianxing was preparing to attack, so he didn't expect Kang Xinmu to suddenly attack. However, Quan Tianxing was only stunned for a moment before he immediately thought of Kang Xinmu's intentions. He didn't pay much attention to it before, but when he heard Kang Xinmu's roar, he broke out in a cold sweat. Without a doubt, he didn't think much about it because the situation was rather tense. After all, it was a race against time. However, it was obvious that Kang Xinmu had helped him think of that. The 4th and 5th weak points were consecutive weak points that he couldn't break through by himself. Hence, he had to let the others use his strength to break through the next weak point. In other words, the training of the strange statue had come in handy now. In fact, it was a crucial role. Quan Tianxing didn't hesitate at all. When Gu Xinyue attacked the 3rd weak point, he waved his hand and launched an offensive star martial technique of the stars at Kang Xinmu with all his might. A star storm instantly blasted in front of Kang Xinmu. Kang Xinmu then blocked it with the golden light of the Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal. Immediately after, his devouring power erupted and devoured the power for his own use. While Kang Xinmu was devouring the power, Gu Xinyue had already broken through the 3rd weak point. She was then surrounded by the 3 statues, and the space power was still condensing. It could be felt that the space power condensed by the 3 statues was getting stronger and stronger. It was accumulating power, and no one knew when it would erupt. Once it did, someone would die. Kill. Quan Tianxing had already unleashed all his power and replaced Gu Xinyue to break through the 4th weak point. At this critical juncture, Quan Tianxing had already decided to hand his fate to Kang Xinmu. Obviously, he was greedy and wanted to obtain the treasures that would be rewarded for breaking through the 3 statues. There were only 2 people from the Polaris tribe. He had to do his best. In fact, if he was worried, he could totally not attack and wait for Gu Xinyue to be killed by the 3 statues. However, he didn't do that. Instead, he chose to attack and let Kang Xinmu make the choice. No matter what, Kang Xinmu's abilities were obvious to all. He had made it this far because of Kang Xinmu. Quan Tianxing chose to believe in Kang Xinmu. When Quan Tianxing was surrounded by the 3 statues, Kang Xinmu attacked and blasted the same power that Quan Tianxing had used to attack him just now. He then destroyed the 5th weak point on one of the statues. Before Quan Tianxing attacked the 4th weak point, he used a ray of starlight to illuminate it for Kang Xinmu so that Kang Xinmu could use his power to attack it. This cooperation could be said to be perfect. Although they belonged to different races, at this moment, both sides treated each other as comrades in arms. Perhaps it was because they wanted to obtain treasures as rewards, but it had to be said that Jiang Shenwu didn't have any distracting thoughts at this moment. Quan Tianxing should be the same. After all, the situation was too tense and he didn't have time to think. It was very likely that if he thought about other things and wasted a breath of time, he would fail in the end. After Kang Xinmu destroyed the 5th weak point, the 3 statues actually directly surrounded Kang Xinmu. Even if Kang Xinmu used someone else's power to destroy the weak point, the 3 statues actually thought that it was Kang Xinmu who did it. This caused Kang Xinmu's face to darken again. This situation was beyond his expectations. It was obvious that the situation was not good. He attacked and destroyed the fifth weak point, which meant that the sixth weak point was Gu Xinyue's attack, and the seventh and eighth weak points were handled by Yu Han. Time was too tight. Chapter 49-36. This made Kang Xinmu break out in a cold sweat. Fortunately, it was him who used Quan Tianxing's power to attack the fifth weak point, and not Gu Xinyue. In other words, the sixth weak point was not Kang Xinmu's responsibility. Otherwise, Kang Xinmu would have been sentenced to death if he hadn't prepared in advance. The difficulty of this test was simply astonishing. We acted too rashly. Kang Xinmu thought, but now was not the time to think about this. He was currently surrounded by the three statues, unable to move at all. Next, it was Gu Xinyue's turn to attack, directly attacking the sixth weak point. Gu Xinyue was very clear about her responsibility. For her, this operation to defeat the three statues could fail, but Kang Xinmu must not die. Whether Suyi died, Yu Han died, or Quan Tianxing died, Gu Xinyue didn't care. In any case, she didn't want to die, and she also didn't want Kang Xinmu to die. This was Gu Xinyue's opinion. Therefore, now Gu Xinyue directly attacked the sixth weak point and rescued Kang Xinmu from the blockade. In this way, Gu Xinyue would continue to be trapped by the three statues. And when Gu Xinyue attacked, Kang Xinmu calmly ordered, "Yu Han, you attack the side of Suyi, let Suyi attack the eighth weak point that you are responsible for. Then, immediately attack the seventh weak point, and at the same time mark the position of the eighth weak point." There were still many things that Yu Han needed to do. This genius from the Bone Imperial family didn't dare to be careless, and immediately followed Kang Xinmu's instructions. First, he condensed a white bone spike and attacked the back of the head of one of the three statues. This white bone spike didn't do much damage, but after it hit, a layer of dense white mark appeared on the back of the statue's head. That was the eighth weak spot. Immediately after, Yu Han launched an attack at Suyi. To be honest, Yu Han was more willing to let Quan Tianxing save her, but Quan Tianxing's performance was too terrible. If he messed up, she would be done for. Therefore, he still believed in Kang Xinmu's arrangement and directly asked Suyi to save him. Then, after Gu Xinyue broke the sixth weakness, Yu Han directly attacked the seventh weakness. The next test for Suyi was extremely serious. She needed to use and control the inherited power of the Bone Royal family to attack the eighth weakness of the statue. He had tried using other people's power to attack before when he was dealing with the strange statue, but the situation now was completely different from before. Suyi wasn't very familiar with the power of the Bone Royal family, so it was even more difficult to use it. But time waits for no man. Suyi gathered the power of the white bone spikes that Yu Han attacked in her direction, and then tried to explode it, directly attacking the eighth weakness of the statue. With a loud bang, the power of the white bone spikes condensed into a whirlwind, directly smashing the eighth weakness of the statue. Then, the three statues directly changed their target, suppressing Suyi again. And Kang Xinmu was already prepared. At this time, he erupted with the ninth stage Extreme Dragon Explosion, directly blasting the ninth weakness that he was responsible for, freeing Suyi from it. Next was the 10th weakness that Suyi was responsible for. Almost as soon as Suyi was freed from the seal, she directly condensed her own inherited power of the 16-winged heavenly demon god, majestically smashing the 10th weakness of the statue. Before this, Suyi didn't hesitate and had already attacked the empty space next to him. Because the next weakness was also Su Ye's responsibility. It could be said that Su Ye's performance was simply perfect. When she smashed the 10th weakness of the statue, Kang Xinmu had already been freed from the seal. But waiting for Kang Xinmu to devour was a bit too much time, so Yu Han, who had just been freed, directly took over Su Ye's power. Yu Han gathered Su Ye's strength and then struck towards the 11th weak point. The 11 weaknesses of the 3 statues were smashed one after another. At this point, these 3 statues had basically passed the test, because next, each person only needed to attack once, and there wouldn't be any complicated actions. But Kang Xinmu was still a bit worried. Would they be able to make it in time? What if the 3 statues finished condensing their spatial power and then killed him at the last moment? Hurry, hurry, hurry. Heavenly Spring Star's 12th weakness. Yu Han's 13th weakness. Finally, it was Gu Xinyue's 14th weakness, followed by Kang Xinmu's 15th weakness. When Kang Xinmu's 9th stage Extreme Dragon Explosion smashed the 15th weakness of the 3 statues, the 3 statues immediately released a spatial power, spreading a wave of ripples in the surroundings. Kang Xinmu was no longer trapped by the 3 statues, because after the spatial ripples spread out, the 3 statues directly shattered in the field. This also meant that their team had successfully dealt with these 3 statues, and this test could be considered passed. Just now, they consecutively broke through the 15th statue's weakness, and it didn't take more than 20 breaths of time. In the end, when Kang Xinmu attacked, he felt that the power condensed by the 3 statues was about to be released. No one knew when they would attack, so Kang Xinmu also didn't know how close he was to failing this test. In any case, he succeeded this time. As the spatial ripples spread out from the shattering of the 3 statues, 25 rays of light swept out from the field. These 25 rays of light seemed to appear out of thin air, but it was obvious that they were similar to the reward lights from breaking the statues. They were probably rewards for them. A total of 25 rewards? Even if they're just the most common spatial attribute materials, the total value is equivalent to 750,000 gold dragon coins. Kang Xinmu was simply shocked by this scene. However, at this time, he wasn't in a hurry to collect these light rewards. Instead, he looked around. Their team wasn't the only one undergoing this test, there were 2 other teams. However, when Kang Xinmu looked around, he couldn't help but be stunned. He discovered that whether it was Murong Liani and Chu Yueqiang's team, or Huang Yun and Jing Luo's team, none of them had started attacking the 3 statues. Instead, while dodging the attacks of the 3 statues, they were observing Kang Xinmu's team. Kang Xinmu's team had actually become Xiaobai's rats. Chapter 49-37. When the 3 statues were finally smashed by Kang Xinmu and the others, the 5 of them finally breathed a sigh of relief. Facing the 25 reward lights in the center, the 5 of them looked at each other, and no one took the initiative to snatch them. How about this, each of you take the 5 rewards closest to you. Anyway, we don't know what these rewards are, so what we can get depends on luck. Su Yi put forward a suggestion. Hearing her words, Jiang Shenwu nodded in agreement and said, "That's right. We were able to defeat the 3 statues this time because we worked together. Everyone played their part. If we were one less person, we wouldn't have been able to complete this trial. So, each person will choose 5, and the reward closest to them will be divided equally. This is the fairest way. After all, there are likely to be other tests later. I feel that this reward will definitely not be the final reward." Hearing Kang Xinmu's words, Yu Han and Quan Tianqing looked at each other, and then nodded in agreement. However, Yu Han still said, "It's necessary to divide the rewards equally, but for the sake of fairness, how about we each choose one in order? Let's take turns, so that we can't blame others for whatever reward we get. Kang Xinmu, you go first, and then the ladies go first. Quan Tianqing and I will choose last." When these words came out, Kang Xinmu was quite surprised. He didn't expect Yu Han to be so modest. In this case, Kang Xinmu had nothing to say. Kang Xinmu also nodded, and then randomly chose a light reward closest to him. He didn't open this reward for the time being, but signaled Su Yi and Gu Xinyue to choose another reward. Then it was Yu Han and Quan Tianqing's turn to choose. Originally, Yu Han might have thought that after someone touched these rewards, something might appear and they could see the contents of the rewards, but in fact, he miscalculated. In fact, these rewards were completely random. No one knew what the reward would be. Everyone casually picked and chose. When they were done, the other two teams finally began to deal with the three statues according to Jiang Shenwu's previous experience. In fact, the process of breaking through the weaknesses of the 15 statues could be done in an instant. If this dragged on for too long, the three statues would definitely kill one of them, leading to the failure of the test. However, regardless of whether it was Murong Liani's team or Jing Luo's and Huang Yun's teams, after seeing Jiang Shenwu's team destroy the three statues, they knew that there was no possibility of failure. In terms of battle strength, they were simply too strong. To be able to possess such tyrannical battle strength, it also meant that their comprehension abilities were exceptional. His comprehension ability was second to none in the world. As long as he saw the process of Kang Xinmu's battle, he would be able to completely understand what kind of test existed between the three statues. Therefore, the speed at which they destroyed the three statues was even faster than Kang Xinmu and the others. After all, they knew the rules of the test before challenging the three statues. In the end, the time it took for Murong Liani and Chu Yueqiang to destroy the three statues was 3 breaths faster than Jing Luo and Huang Yun's team. This also meant that Murong Liani and her team were the second team to destroy the three statues. When the three statues were destroyed by them, 10 reward light spots appeared in the area they were in. These 10 reward light points meant that each of them could only get 2 rewards. As for Huang Yun's and Jing Luo's teams, only 5 light dots appeared in their area. In other words, each of them could only get 1 reward. This made Huang Yun and Jing Luo extremely uncomfortable. Their battle strength wasn't low, but because their coordination was slightly lacking, they were slower than Murong Liani's team by 3 breaths. This was something that couldn't be helped. There was no point in blaming the heavens and blaming others. They even wondered why they weren't Kang Xinmu's team and the first team to destroy the three statues. But they were also very clear that Kang Xinmu's team had risked their lives to obtain these 5 rewards. Without knowing the specific rules of the test, Kang Xinmu's team was the first to attack. Although it might be because they directly attacked the first weakness of the three statues, causing them to have no choice but to continue, it had to be said that Kang Xinmu's team almost failed this test. Moreover, if they failed, one of them would die, and the other 4 would lose the right to continue the challenge. If they successfully passed this risk, then they would give Kang Xinmu's team 5 rewards each. Anyone would feel that they deserved it. At Jing Luo's, Huang Yun's, and Murong Liani's level, emotions like jealousy no longer existed. Each of them was a proud son of heaven. They knew very clearly that only with effort would there be rewards. Only with risk would there be more rewards. They chose to play it safe, so it was normal for their rewards to be slightly lower. Jiang Shenwu's team of 5 had been observing the battles of the other 2 teams up until now. They had a better understanding of the coordination and fighting styles of the 2 teams. Then, they finally started to check what rewards they had obtained. Jiang Shenwu directly gathered the 5 light dots and sent them into the devouring space. Then, the 5 light dots gradually dimmed in the devouring space and revealed their original appearances. These 3 are all basic spatial attribute materials. They can increase the effects of spatial battle runes by 50%. These 3 spatial materials are worth about 30,000 gold dragon coins each. And these 2, one is a spatial crystal, worth more than 100,000 gold dragon coins. And this thing, it seems to be another special material? Kang Xinmu really didn't know what these things were used for. Fortunately, he had the 2 great gods, the demonic god ancestor's consciousness and the black dragon's consciousness in his mind. Thus, he humbly asked the two great gods for guidance. This is just a high-grade brilliant void material. It can double the effect of the battle weapon's void battle runes, said Jiangchen. The demonic god ancestor's consciousness directly explained, this thing's value isn't low either. However, I advise you to keep it for yourself. After all, the effects of this thing and the shapeless crystal can be stacked. Do you understand what I mean? Hearing the demonic god ancestor's explanation, Kang Xinmu instantly became interested in this thing. Shapeless crystal, shapeless weapon, those were already extremely powerful battle weapons. If he added this high-grade brilliant void material, wouldn't it be even stronger? If he really had enough dazzling materials to customize a formless weapon, how strong would that formless weapon be? Chapter 49-38. His own battle weapon had the effect of permanently increasing his own strength. Currently, Kang Xinmu's Great Compassion Heavenly Dragon Seal and Phantom Book could increase his combat strength by 3 to 5 times. These were already top-notch dragon weapons. However, if he had an amorphous weapon that had been transformed by the amorphous crystal, it would at least increase Kang Xinmu's combat strength by 10 to 20 times. Moreover, if he had high-grade brilliant void materials, he could forge a dragon weapon that could perfectly complement the amorphous crystal. That would probably increase Kang Xinmu's combat strength by 30 to 40 times. This was simply terrifying. This meant that compared to his current strength, Kang Xinmu could challenge stronger opponents by several levels. Currently, Kang Xinmu would not lose to a first-level super divine dragon warrior. However, if he had such an amorphous weapon, Kang Xinmu would at least be able to defeat a third-level super divine dragon warrior. Be it the amorphous weapon or the amorphous crystal, both were inherited from an extremely ancient method. It was hard to say whether anyone could forge an amorphous weapon now. Such a powerful battle weapon was a true top-notch battle weapon. Unless one could obtain sufficient materials from these ruins, it was basically impossible to forge a higher-grade battle weapon. Only materials obtained from the ruins could be used to forge a stronger battle weapon. The ancient materials in the ruins had far surpassed what the major tribes could usually obtain. This was why they were so frantic in their pursuit of these battle weapons. Kang Xinmu did some calculations. The total value of the 5 rewards this time was about 300,000 gold dragon coins. The others should be about the same, right? This was a great harvest. A mid-level ruin is indeed a mid-level ruin. I can obtain so many cultivation resources just by walking around. If it were a low-level ruin, I'm afraid that the value of all the treasures in the entire ruin added up wouldn't be comparable to the rewards from challenging the statues this time. Kang Xinmu sighed. Even though there were absolute supreme treasures like saint-grade heaven and earth treasures in basic ruins, it was difficult to obtain anything good without saint-grade heaven and earth treasures in most cases. The total value of the items in the beginner ruins was about 1,000,000 gold dragon coins. The total value of a mid-grade relic was around 10 million gold dragon coins. It all depended on whether or not one could dig out all the treasures within. At this time, Gu Xinyue came to Kang Xinmu's side. Kang Xinmu, do you know what this is? Gu Xinyue showed 2 metallic objects to Kang Xinmu and asked doubtfully. These are my 5 rewards this time. 2 of them are items. These 2 pieces of metal look like some kind of forging material. Unfortunately, I don't know its value. Gu Xinyue said gloomily. The ruins in the 7th region of the Chaos Battlefield were older than the previous 6 regions. Therefore, many of the materials and resources produced in the 7th region were unknown to ordinary people. This was very normal. Moreover, Gu Xinyue wasn't a knowledgeable person. At the very least, she couldn't recognize many things in the 7th region of the Chaos Battlefield. These 2 are horror metals. Kang Xinmu's eyes lit up when he received the guidance of the 2 experts. Horror metals were considered top-notch forging materials in ancient times. They can be used to forge battle weapons that can contain more battle runes. These 2 pieces of horror metals are very valuable. They might be worth 100,000 gold dragon coins each. After all, although horror metals are precious, these 2 pieces aren't enough. If you want to forge a powerful battle weapon, you'll need at least 10 pieces of horror metals like this. Kang Shinmu's eyes lit up because horror metals were the best material for forging formless battle weapons. Unfortunately, the demon god ancestor's consciousness indicated that if he wanted to forge a transcendent grade dragon weapon, he would need at least 10 pieces of horror's metal as the main material. Only then would the value of the forged dragon weapon be higher, and its combat strength would also be stronger. It could also be embedded with more battle runes of different attributes. 10 pieces of horror metals was something that Kang Shinmu couldn't afford even with all of his assets combined. Moreover, such a precious material couldn't be found in the market at all. These 2 pieces of horror metals wouldn't be of much use to him. Then I'll give it to you. Gu Xinyue didn't think too much about it. She pursed her lips and said, "The psychedelic astral crystal you exchanged with me was very useful to me. The formless crystal I gave you is more like something useless. If you really want to forge a formless battle weapon, these 2 pieces of horror metals can be of some help." It's of some help. Kang Shinmu didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But this is something worth 200,000 gold dragon coins. Are you sure you want to give it to me? What's wrong with giving it to you? Gu Xinyue rolled her eyes at him. What's our relationship? Don't forget. If you can become stronger in the future, it'll only be good for me. Anyway, I have no use for this horror's gold. As for selling it, according to what you said, it won't be easy to sell it, right? Although it's worth it, who would buy it without 8 or 10 pieces of horror metal? Even if someone bought it, they wouldn't be able to forge it into a dragon weapon. This horror metal's grade should be extremely high. It'll be very difficult to forge it into a dragon weapon. I'm afraid that only a blacksmith of the upper 3 levels can do it. That's why I said that this thing can't be sold. I might as well give it to you. Don't you think so? Gu Xinyue winked at Kang Shinmu as she spoke. Kang Shinmu had no choice but to accept the 2 pieces of horror metal. It didn't matter if he could find more. With these 2 pieces of horror metal, perhaps this could be considered a start. It wasn't easy to forge a formless weapon. Kang Shinmu couldn't be in a hurry. He could only slowly accumulate the materials. Who knew when he would be able to gather them? Kang Shinmu accepted the 2 pieces of horror metal and passed the 3 spatial materials he had to Gu Xinyue. These 3 spatial materials were useless to Kang Shinmu. He already had high-grade spatial materials. Therefore, even though they were only worth 90,000 gold dragon coins, Gu Xinyue could sell them if he gave them to her. It was an equivalent exchange. In any case, Kang Shinmu didn't want Gu Xinyue to suffer losses at his hands. If that happened, their relationship would become even more complicated. After the exchange, Gu Xinyue didn't refuse and kept the 3 spatial materials into her pouch. Suyi ran over and asked Kang Shinmu excitedly, "Kang Shinmu, what do you think this is?" Chapter 49-39. As expected of a mid-level relic in the 7th region. The things here were really strange. Even a royal genius of the demon god clan like Suyi had never seen something like this before. Kang Shinmu glanced at the light that was constantly spinning and twisting. Then, according to the demon god ancestor's explanation, he explained, this should be an ancient war spirit. It is the spirit of a combat weapon that has fused with its master in ancient times. This kind of ancient war spirit can be absorbed by your combat weapon, making it easier for your combat weapon to fuse with you. Ancient war spirit? Suyi was a little confused after hearing this. Simply put, if you need 10 years to fuse with your combat weapon, after your combat weapon absorbs this ancient war spirit, you may only need a year or even less to achieve the same result. Kang Xinmu continued to explain, moreover, this ancient war spirit has actually lost its consciousness. It only exists as a spirit. The existence of such a spirit can make it easier for your combat weapon to produce its own spirit. I roughly understand now. The effect is that good? Su Yi was a little surprised. A combat weapon that needed 10 years to fuse could be fused in a year. This was 10 times the speed. According to what Kang Xinmu said, this ancient war spirit was definitely an invaluable thing. However, it was undoubtedly a pity to use such a magical thing on an emperor-level combat weapon. Therefore, Su Yi did not intend to fuse it with his Rage God demonic weapon for the time being. Even if his Rage God demonic weapon was already top-notch, there was still a huge gap between it and a Supreme God demonic weapon. There was no need to waste an ancient war spirit now. The reason why Kang Xinmu and the others had not encountered any powerful existences at the Emperor level was because many of the materials had been taken away to upgrade Supreme God demonic weapons. For Emperor level existences, it could be said that it was a pity to use some rare materials. Only those peak Emperor level experts of the older generation who truly explored the wastelands would have such Supreme Emperor level combat weapons. Those peak Emperor level experts of the older generation would basically stay at the peak Emperor level for the rest of their lives. They did not intend to break through to the Supreme God demonic weapon. Their duty was to obtain more good things in the mid-level relic. Therefore, they naturally had to arm themselves to the fullest. If Kang Xinmu's current opponents were those peak Emperor stage experts of the older generation, he might not be a match for them at all. After all, those were formidable existences that had completely fused with their Emperor weapons. Their battle weapons and martial skills were all top-notch, and they had been trained to the peak for tens or even hundreds of years. This kind of person's battle experience was also incomparably terrifying. If Kang Xinmu were to fight against them, he might not be a match for them. Fortunately, the major races had an unspoken rule that they would not send such old fellows to compete with the young people in ordinary ruins exploration. These old guys had their own responsibilities. They either explored more unknown ruins below the 7th region, or explored some known permanent ruins in order to get more good things. Since he couldn't meet them, Kang Xinmu didn't think too much about it. In any case, he had the same opinion as Su Yi. Rather than using the treasures obtained this time on Emperor weapons, it was better to keep them and use them when they reached the Supreme God demonic weapon. That way, they could reach a height that others could not reach even when they were at the Supreme God demonic weapon. It should be known that in the current Emperor stage, other than those experts of the older generation, Kang Xinmu and the others were basically the top. Therefore, there was no need for them to become stronger, unless they wanted to explore some ancient permanent ruins and compete with those experts of the older generation. But even so, Kang Xinmu did not intend to use two good materials at the moment. That would be too wasteful. He had a lot of materials now, and he planned to save them for after he reached the Super Shenron level. And most importantly, Kang Xinmu was still not at the peak Emperor stage. Even if he didn't use these materials, there was still a lot of room for improvement in his battle strength at the peak Emperor stage. His cultivation realm could still be improved. The grade of his divine dragon's blood essence had only reached the 7th level of the Dragon Emperor stage. It was still 2 levels away from the 9th level. If these two aspects were improved to the peak, Kang Xinmu's battle strength would at least be 5 times stronger than it was now. This was where Kang Xinmu's potential lay. It was also the reason why he was not in a hurry to use these precious materials. An ancient war spirit. How good would it be if I could have an ancient war spirit? When Kang Xinmu saw Su Yi put away the ancient war spirit, he felt a little envious of Su Ye's happy expression. Obviously, an ancient war spirit was something that could only be encountered by luck. He did not expect to see one in this intermediate ruins. This was an existence that could allow a cultivator to quickly fuse with their own weapon. Once the weapon and the cultivator fused, they could erupt with twice the power. It was not as simple as an ordinary cultivator using an ordinary weapon. A long time ago, Kang Xinmu had fused with a weapon, but that was too long ago. Since the weapons that Kang Xinmu obtained later on were only used for a short period of time, there had never been a weapon that fused with Kang Xinmu's consciousness. Including the Phantom Ghost Book and the Great Sorrow Heavenly Dragon Seal, these two top-notch Divine Spirit Dragon weapons were already compatible with Kang Xinmu. However, they were still a long way from reaching the level of fusion. Therefore, Kang Xinmu wanted an ancient war spirit, but it was too rare. It was even rarer than a high-grade brilliant void material. If he took it out, it would be worth at least 300,000 gold dragon coins. Suyi had made a huge profit this time. Of course, she most likely wanted to use the ancient war spirit herself. As a genius cultivator of the demon god clan's royal family, she did not lack cultivation resources. She did not need to exchange some precious materials that could not be obtained in the outside world for money. Since an ancient war spirit has appeared in this intermediate ruins once, it is very likely that it will appear again. Kid, work hard. There are many treasures in this intermediate ruins. The demon god ancestor encouraged Kang Xinmu. Kang Xinmu did not feel too conflicted. Anyway, there was still a long way to go. What kind of test would come next? Kang Xinmu did not know, but he was very much looking forward to it now. He was looking forward to the next test and the next reward. No matter which aspect he was looking forward to, it made his blood boil. At this moment, the 3 teams of 15 people had already put away the previous reward light. The distribution was basically complete. Chapter 49-40. The 3 teams, a total of 15 geniuses, were still separated into 3 groups by the giant statue. They were separated into 3 different areas and were unable to communicate with each other. Even if they spoke, the people in the other areas couldn't hear them. Kang Xinmu and Murong Lieni looked at each other. Then, Murong Lieni winked at him, looking extremely lively. Basically, between the various teams, those who knew each other, they could only communicate through eye contact, they didn't have to wait for too long. Just as the 3 squads destroyed the 3 small statues, the giant statue in the center finally moved again. This giant statue also had countless mysterious patterns on it, and these patterns suddenly lit up at this moment. As these mysterious patterns lit up, everyone felt that the space around them had changed. Spatial whirlpools. It was still the same kind of spatial whirlpools. At the same time, spatial ripples spread outwards. Every time the spatial ripples spread in a different direction, everyone's expressions changed slightly. These attacks were still of the sure kill type. Once they were affected, only death awaited them. Thus, they had to dodge all of these attacks. If it was just spatial whirlpools or spatial ripples, everyone would be able to dodge them easily. But now, the 2 were combined. This made everyone more apprehensive when they used their spatial abilities to travel through the void. It wasn't as smooth as before. In fact, if they didn't focus all their attention on sensing the power of space, they might even be affected by these attacks. But just as everyone began to dodge the attacks, one guy suddenly burst out. While dodging the attacks, he launched an attack at the giant humanoid statue in the center. That was the super genius from the Bone Imperial family, Jing Luo. This fella looked like a muscular man. However, the power of the Bone Imperial family's inheritance had condensed into the shape of a giant bone elephant. The giant bone elephant condensed and instantly trampled towards the giant statue in the center. The terrifying giant elephant's hooves actually shook the void, directly causing a spatial tremor on the surface of the statue. Immediately after, everyone saw a layer of white light appear on the surface of the giant statue. This layer of white light faded slightly as Jing Luo's Bone Emperor's giant skeletal elephant attacked it. The light is fainter. It's a very obvious change. However, it's just that the area facing them has become fainter. Seeing this, Kang Xinmu immediately narrowed his eyes. Maybe we should try attacking as well. Yu Han immediately said. Immediately after, a spatial vortex appeared where he was. Fortunately, he was prepared for it. He directly tore through the void and arrived at a safe place, narrowly avoiding the statue's attack. Without a doubt, it would be extremely difficult for everyone to find time to attack under the violent attacks of the giant statue. Even if they did attack, they would not be able to unleash their full strength. Kang Xinmu, on the other hand, appeared to be slightly more relaxed. His comprehension and perception of space was still superior to many of the people present. At this moment, he directly followed Jing Luo's attack and unleashed an attack on the statue. 9th Stage Extreme Dao Roaring Dragon Explosion. Moreover, when he attacked, Kang Xinmu released the Divine Dragon Tyrant Body Technique's strong offensive stance and released all the offensive battle patterns of the Illusory Ghost Book. After a loud explosion, the white light on the surface of the giant statue that was facing Kang Xinmu's team dimmed. However, it was clear that Kang Xinmu's attack was clearly weaker than Jing Luo's. After all, Kang Xinmu's current cultivation realm and inherited blood essence were far from the true peak emperor rank. Therefore, his full-strength attack was still far from Jing Luo's. It was not even half as powerful as his opponent. This made Kang Xinmu a little puzzled. However, there was nothing he could do. Jing Luo was a super genius from the Bone Imperial family who had entered a mid-grade relic. Fortunately, after Kang Xinmu, Gu Xinyue also unleashed her full strength. The inherited power of the Nightmare Illusory Dragon condensed into a 5-colored beam of light that blasted towards the giant statue in the center. Immediately after that, the other people, including the experts from the other 2 squads, began to unleash their strongest attacks on the giant statue. Of course, at the same time, everyone was doing their best to avoid the spatial whirlpools and spatial ripples. If they were hit, they would die. Therefore, they had to attack while ensuring their own survival. Thus, at this time, the entire giant statue was divided into 3 areas, each of which emitted a different degree of white light. This white light gradually faded and became weaker as everyone attacked. The overall offensive power of each team was clearly different. On Murongliani's and Jing Luo's sides, the white light dimmed at about the same speed. On Kang Xinmu's side, it was slower. This also meant that the overall strength of Jiang Xinwu's team couldn't compare to the other 2 teams. This was a normal situation. After all, whether it was Jing Luo, Huang Yun, or Murongliani, they were all top experts at the peak of the emperor level. On the other hand, Kang Xinmu and Suyi weren't even peak emperor rank experts. The only ones who were truly powerful were Gu Xinyue, Yu Han, and Quan Tianqing. On the other hand, Gu Xinyue was best at creating illusions, so she wasn't very useful in dealing with the giant statue in front of her. She had tried but couldn't affect the cultivators in the other areas. Thus, she could only give up. In other words, they could only rely on attacking the giant statues to compete with each other. This made Gu Xinyue rather depressed. Her strength, which she was best at, could not be used in this situation. It was simply too frustrating. On the other hand, Kang Xinmu seemed to be dodging the attacks and attacking the giant statue, but he was secretly preparing a big move. Although he had dodged all the spatial vortexes and spatial ripples that the giant statue had unleashed on him, he had still used his devouring power to continuously devour these energies. Up until now, he had already devoured a considerable amount of spatial energy. If we're comparing which side's attack is stronger and which side can destroy the white light first, I think I've already won. The corner of Kang Xinmu's mouth curled up. Chapter 49-41 On the battlefield, everyone was frantically attacking while dodging the giant statue's attacks. It could be seen that Jing Luo and Murongliani's attacks were the strongest. They were existences at the peak of the emperor level. Jing Luo was the strongest genius of this generation of the Bone Imperial family, and he was also a young genius that the Bone Imperial family had nurtured with countless cultivation resources. Even Yuhan had a natural reverence for Jing Luo. It should be known that even if Yuhan fought against Kong Xinmu wouldn't be able to win so easily, let alone Jing Luo. Of course, if it was a battle of life and death, Kong Xinmu felt that he could still compete with Jing Luo. As for Murongliani, she was already very strong, and because of her nirvana, she had obtained Kong Xinmu's devouring power. Moreover, her cultivation level and inherited blood essence had reached the peak of emperor level. This undeniably strong power made Kong Xinmu's devouring power even stronger. Even though it had lost some of the characteristics of Kong Xinmu's devouring power, it was still stronger than some ordinary powers. For example, when Murongliani used her devouring power, she could completely devour her opponent's power, including their defenses. Unfortunately, she couldn't use the power she devoured. This was the biggest difference. She could devour, but she couldn't use it. This was because she didn't have the devouring space, and the devouring space was something unique to Kong Xinmu. But even so, the power of the devouring power was still vividly displayed when her cultivation base and inheritance were at their peak. The terrifying devouring power could directly devour the white light on the giant statue. This was something that even the current Kong Xinmu couldn't do. And this also made Murongliani the one with the strongest offensive ability. Unfortunately, Murongliani's teammates weren't as strong as Jing Luo's. Just the demon god race's top expert, Huang Yun, was already comparable to the other two in Murongliani's team. This was a huge difference. When Jing Luo and Huang Yun worked together, they could be said to be invincible. The white light on the giant statue's surface was fading at a terrifying speed. At the same time, they were dodging the giant statue's void attacks with ease. Neither the spatial whirlpools nor the void ripples posed much of a threat to them. As time passed, everyone became more and more proficient in attacking the giant statue in between dodging attacks. In addition, their comprehension of space was also rapidly improving, making them even more proficient in this process. Among the three teams, it was clear that Jiang Shenwu's team was the most dazzling. Moreover, the gap between them and the other two teams was getting bigger and bigger. It was clear that the overall strength of Jiang Shenwu's team was slightly weaker than the other two teams. Originally, with Gu Xinyue, who could compete with the super mystical dragon, they shouldn't be at such a disadvantage. Unfortunately, Gu Xinyue's main abilities lay in illusions and illusions. The Nightmare Illusory Dragon's abilities couldn't be used much in this kind of attack. It couldn't even display half of its full strength. Therefore, Kong Xinmu's team seemed to be at a disadvantage. If this continued, it was very likely that they would be the last team to destroy the giant statue's white light. Moreover, the demonic god ancestor had a feeling that if they couldn't destroy the white light within a certain amount of time, there would be serious consequences. For example, if the first team to destroy the giant statue's white light appeared, if Kong Xinmu's team couldn't destroy the statue's white light after a certain amount of time, their team might be eliminated. That would be the best-case scenario. The worst-case scenario would be them being killed by the giant statue. This wasn't impossible. Therefore, whether it was Gu Xinyue, Su Yi, Yuhan, or Quan Tianqing, all of them were attacking the giant statue with all their might. Quan Tianqing was also putting his life on the line. At this time, he was swallowing a recovery elixir like crazy. Every now and then, he would swallow a recovery elixir. For the sake of this operation, it could be said that he was risking his life just to get more rewards in this mid-level relic. The power of the stars that erupted from him was still extremely destructive. It was mainly a large area of effect attack, and to the giant statue's entire surface of white light, the effect of the attack was quite terrifying and obvious. It could be said that on Kang Xinmu's team, Quan Tianqing alone contributed more than 30% to the strength of the attack. As for the others, they couldn't be said to be weak. The main reason was that this situation wasn't conducive for them to display their strengths. For example, Gu Xinyue was like this. It was the same for Kang Xinmu. After all, Kang Xinmu didn't put too much effort into attacking. Moreover, the Phantom Ghost Book only had more than 300 offensive battle runes. The rest were void battle runes and concealment battle runes. For a strong attack, Kang Xinmu was indeed at a disadvantage. However, this wasn't important. The important thing was that Kang Xinmu had devoured an almost limitless amount of spatial energy. From the surrounding spatial whirlpools and void ripples, Kang Xinmu could only devour a little bit at a time. However, after such a long period of time, Kang Xinmu had devoured an extremely terrifying amount of power. Just as Jing Luo and Murong Lieni saw each other as competitors and neglected Kang Xinmu's side, Kang Xinmu suddenly exploded with the spatial void power that he had been devouring all this time. The spatial attribute void energy condensed into a void storm. Like a tornado, it swept towards the huge statue, causing the entire space to distort. When the void storm arrived, the white radiance on the surface of the huge statue seemed to be devoured by the void. It was continuously shattered and destroyed. In almost an instant, the remaining white light was completely blasted away by Kang Xinmu's attack, revealing the surface of the giant statue, which was covered in mysterious patterns. This scene caused the situation on the battlefield to change dramatically. No one expected Kang Xinmu to have such a move. Wasn't this too terrifying? What kind of move was this? Even Yu Han, Quan Tianqing, and the others on his side were dumbfounded. If it wasn't for the fact that the giant statue's spatial attack had stopped after Kang Xinmu destroyed the white light, they might have been hit by it. It was too shocking. Chapter 49-42. As Jiang Shenwu unleashed his void-devouring power, the white light in the area where Jiang Shenwu and his team were located instantly receded like the receding tides of the sea. When Murong Lieni and Jing Luo's team only had a thin layer of white light left, the white light around Kang Xinmu's team was completely destroyed. This meant that Kang Xinmu's team was the first team to destroy the white light. At the same time, a large number of light dots lit up on Kang Xinmu's giant statue. Kang Xinmu's team was very familiar with these light dots. These were the reward light dots. Another 25. Yu Han and Quan Tianqing were so excited that they could die. As expected, the rules of this round were exactly the same as the previous round. The first to complete would receive 25 rewards, and the second to complete would receive 10 and 5 rewards respectively. The difference was too big. The two looked at Kang Xinmu's black dragon body and couldn't help but sigh. This was a miracle. Originally, they thought that they would definitely lose this round. After all, whether it was Jing Luo or Murong Lieni, they were much stronger than their team. Who would have thought that Kang Xinmu could suddenly release such a terrifying and violent attack? Even now, the majority of the people present didn't know how Kang Xinmu could release such a powerful attack. Perhaps only Chu Yueqiang and Gu Xinyue knew a little. Not many people knew about Kang Xinmu's devouring power. During the arena battles, Kang Xinmu didn't have the chance to use it. At this moment, when the 25 reward light dots appeared and flew towards Kang Xinmu's team, Murong Lieni and the geniuses of Jing Luo's team were so shocked that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. They couldn't believe it. They had been eyeing each other with the sole intention of getting first place, but who would have thought that they would be surpassed by the team they had looked down upon just now, and even take away the prize for first place. This simply made them feel as if they wanted to die. Following that, they worked even harder because the last place would only receive 5 rewards. Everyone could only receive 1 reward, which was too little. If they could snatch it before the other team, they would at least be able to get 2 sets of rewards. Hence, everyone unleashed their strongest attacks. At this moment, perhaps due to nervousness or something else, the 2 teams almost had people hit by the spatial vortexes and void ripples. Fortunately, they managed to turn the situation around at the last moment and barely avoided the attacks. This scene made Kang Xinmu and the others' scalp tingle. In order to be the first to break the white brilliance of the giant statue, these guys were completely desperate. Even if they were almost killed, they were not afraid. As long as they were not killed, it was fine. The act of walking on the steel wire of death really made people's hair stand on end. But didn't these cultivators fight with their lives on the way here? If they didn't fight with their lives on the line, how could there be these peak emperor rank geniuses? Kang Xinmu believed that all the geniuses here had fought with their lives on the line many times. Each of them had experienced life and death situations. Only then could they face death so calmly. No matter what, Kang Xinmu and the others had already obtained 5 rewards. According to the previous distribution, Kang Xinmu was the first to pick one. They were a team. Although Kang Xinmu had done the most in this mission, he didn't take credit for it and didn't want to take more rewards. He knew that if he started now, it would not be easy to deal with the rest. So, he only took 5 of the rewards. In any case, Gu Xinyue had given him the haze gold. He was already quite good. As for Su Ye's ancient battle spirit, she would certainly keep it for her own use. Kang Xinmu had a headache now. The cultivation resources obtained in this intermediate relic seemed to be useful to him. If he wanted to keep them, he would definitely have to take out a lot of gold dragon coins and give them to the demon god race. After all, 30% of them belonged to the demon god race. As for how much he had to give, it would depend on the final harvest. In any case, Kang Xinmu was quite happy now. He had obtained 5 more rewards. 3 of them were spatial attribute materials that could enhance the effect of void battle runes by 50%. This thing was worth 30,000 gold dragon coins, but it was only a basic reward in this intermediate relic. Obviously, if the team that obtained the last place in the race, the average reward for each of them would be about the same as this spatial radiant material. Even though the value of 30,000 gold dragon coins wasn't low by any means, it was nothing compared to the rewards of the first party. Kang Xinmu and the others' harvest was worth hundreds of thousands of gold dragon coins each time. This time, in addition to the 3 dazzling spatial materials, Jiang Shenwu also obtained a spatial crystal. However, this time, the spatial crystal was of a higher grade. It contained twice as much void energy as an ordinary spatial crystal. The last treasure was a storage treasure. It was also very valuable. There were 1,200 void battle runes engraved in it, and the space within it was extremely vast, reaching a radius of 10,000 miles. Such a storage treasure could even be built into a palace. One could imagine how many things could be stored in it. This treasure looked like a pendant with the words Star Moon engraved on it. The Star Moon pendant looked quite good. It was beautiful and had a large storage space. 1,200 void battle runes had already exceeded the capacity of ordinary top-notch holy spiritual dragon weapons. If he wanted to sell this Star Moon pendant, he could sell it for at least 200,000 gold dragon coins. This was because the Star Moon pendant seemed to have another kind of power. It could burst out a one-time protective power. Kang Xinmu did not know how strong this protective power was. However, according to the estimation of the demon god's ancestor, this protective power could at least withstand a full-powered attack from a peak supreme god like Kang Xinmu's brilliant gem. However, that was all. There was only one attack, and then it would take a long time to recover. This time would be between 7 to 10 days. Therefore, it could be said that this item was useless to supreme experts, but to supreme god-level juniors, it was definitely on the level of a divine artifact. At this time, Suyi ran over excitedly. Kong Shinmu, do you need this forging material? This thing is called haze metal, right? Chapter 49-43. Kong Shinmu was surprised to see Suyi take out the shock metal. You gave me shock metal 3 times out of the 5 rewards? That's not it. Suyi shook her head and said, I already had 2 pieces of shock metal, and I got another one this time. I thought that if you needed it, I could give it to you first. She was the same as Gu Xinyue and wanted to give Kong Shinmu something. However, Kong Shinmu had given Gu Xinyue a psychedelic astral crystal. This psychedelic astral crystal was indeed the most useful thing to Gu Xinyue, so Kong Shinmu had no qualms accepting her shock metal. But this Suyi, Kong Shinmu had not given her anything, so it was a little strange for him to accept her gift so rashly. You don't have to exchange anything with me. Just the technique you gave me to open the wings is worth at least 100 pieces of shock metal. Oh no, 1,000 pieces, or even 10,000 pieces of shock metal can't buy something like this. Suyi pursed her lips and said, so this shock metal is my thanks to you. Not only now, but if I get more shock metal in the future, I will give it to you again. Was that so? When Kong Shinmu heard this, he did not know whether to laugh or cry. So that was how it was. The technique to open the wings was indeed very precious to her. It was even more important to Gu Xinyue than the psychedelic astral crystal. This was because after Kong Shinmu gave Suyi this technique, she could completely teach it to the other members of the demon god royal family. This was not just a little. It was a powerful technique that could change the entire demon god royal family. Since that was the case, Kong Shinmu had no qualms accepting it. So now, Kong Shinmu actually had 5 pieces of shock metal. He was not so far away from the 10 pieces of shock metal he had initially thought of. If he had more shock metal. Or rather, did Yuhan and Quan Tianqing have any shock metal? Right now, I have 2 ordinary spatial crystals and 1 high-grade spatial crystal in my hands. Maybe I can exchange these 2 ordinary space condensed essences for horror's gold? Thinking up to this point, Kong Shinmu immediately went to look for Yuhan and Quan Tianqing. Although he did not get too close to them, he still expressed his thoughts. No one knew what rewards Yuhan and Quan Tianqing had received. Everyone had their own secrets, not to mention that Yuhan and Quan Tianqing were enemies of Kong Shinmu. Hearing Kong Shinmu's request to exchange for the ominous metal, Yuhan and Quan Tianqing looked at each other. It was obvious that they were in a dilemma. Logically speaking, there was no need for them to exchange with Kong Shinmu to satisfy Kong Shinmu's needs. After all, they were still competitors with Kong Shinmu. Although they were working together for the time being, on the whole, on a racial level, there was no doubt that they were competitors. Therefore, helping Kong Shinmu was equivalent to aiding the enemy. It was definitely not something that could be done under normal circumstances. However, the fact that they could receive so many rewards now was because of Kong Shinmu. From a personal point of view, Yuhan and Quan Tianqing admired Kong Shinmu very much and were very willing to exchange with him. Are you saying that you want to exchange space condensed essences for horror's gold? Yuhan said in a deep voice, after all, we are competitors at the end of the day. If you really want horror's gold, you can exchange one of your space condensed essences and 1 set of space brilliance material for one of our horror's gold. How about that? This way, they would be able to live with their conscience. After all, they were taking advantage of Kong Shinmu. It was not easy to buy horror's gold in the market outside. After all, very few forging materials of this grade were produced. Even if Kong Shinmu had to pay an extra 30,000 gold dragon coins, it would not be a loss to him personally. Therefore, after some consideration, Kong Shinmu nodded and said, all right. This way, Yuhan and Quan Tianqing would not be taking advantage of him. In fact, in terms of total value, they would be earning a little more. This was very beneficial to both parties. Moreover, it was not like they owed each other anything. If it was an equivalent exchange like Kang Xinmu had said, it would be equivalent to Kang Xinmu owing them a favor. Therefore, this kind of exchange was really the most suitable method. Just like that, Kang Xinmu used the space condensed essences and the space brilliance material to exchange for 2 sets of horror's gold. This way, he had a total of 7 sets of horror's gold. He was only 3 sets away from being able to forge a true formless weapon. If he really could not obtain the remaining horror's gold from this trip to the intermediate ruins, it was still possible to find 3 sets of horror's gold. Therefore, Kang Xinmu was not in a hurry. He directly completed the exchange with Yuhan and Quan Tianqing and obtained 2 sets of horror's gold. At the same time, he gave each of his space condensed essences and space brilliance material. This kind of exchange was very profitable for both sides. At this moment, the other 2 teams were finally separated. This time, Jing Luo and Huang Yun's team were more skilled. They were the first to break through the white light outside the statue. However, Murong Liani's team was only a breath slower. Both sides broke through the white light at almost the same time. However, in that one breath of time, Jing Luo and Huang Yun's team became second, while Murong Liani became third. This made the 10 members of both teams somewhat angry. They should have been first and second, but who would have thought that they would become second and third? Looking at the expressions of everyone on Kang Xinmu's team, the 10 of them were incomparably depressed. This was especially so for Jing Luo, the most talented genius of the Bone Imperial family. He was becoming more and more interested in Kang Xinmu. Originally, Jing Luo didn't think much of it. However, twice in a row, Kang Xinmu had displayed extraordinary battle experience, battle intuition, and combat strength. This made Jing Luo extremely interested. Before entering this mid-grade remnant, the seniors of the Bone Imperial family had warned him to pay attention to this Kang Xinmu. At that time, he didn't pay much attention to it. But now, Jing Luo felt that Kang Xinmu had the qualifications to make him pay attention to him. It was rare to see someone with such qualifications. Murong Liani and Huang Yun could barely be considered as such. But now, he was more interested in Kang Xinmu. This made him curious. What kind of abilities did this Kang Xinmu have? How could he explode with such power? For a period of time, the huge statue didn't move. It seemed to be giving them some time to distribute the spoils of war. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, the giant statue in the center finally made a new move. The giant statue stood up and all the mysterious patterns on its body lit up. Then, the space barrier that separated the 3 teams suddenly shattered. Chapter 49-44. Kang Xinmu had gained a lot, but he did not relax. Because he knew that in this intermediate relic, there was likely to be a space treasure of heaven and earth. The powerful space treasure with the words, star, and void, engraved on it. It was hard to say how many engravings there were, but as long as he got it, it would be the biggest gain of this operation. Of course, it was hard to say whether that thing really existed in this intermediate relic. After all, what Kang Xinmu saw before was just an illusion created by the psychedelic astral crystal. Although it could be passed off as the real thing, it was still fake. Next, Kang Xinmu's biggest goal was this space treasure of heaven and earth. Space, star and moon. Seeing that we have already obtained the star and moon pendant, the possibility of a space treasure of heaven in this intermediate relic is not small. The demon god ancestor's consciousness leisurely told Kang Xinmu. Kang Xinmu did not care much about it. Anyway, he had to go all the way, so he just had to do his best. At this moment, the whole space was connected. This scene made the 15 people a little stunned. What kind of test rules would there be next? Kang Xinmu. At this time, Murong Liani's voice finally came over. When the space barrier was broken, the people of the 3 squads could communicate. Lieni. Kang Xinmu nodded at her and threw a smile. Murong Lieni glared at him fiercely. You were so impressive just now. Our team was forced to the third place because of you. Kang Xinmu could only smile bitterly when he heard this. He had no choice. Of course, he had to fight for the reward if he could. Fortunately, Murong Lieni was just joking with Kang Xinmu. She did not really mean to blame Kang Xinmu. To be honest, in this kind of competition, everyone relied on their own ability. There was no need to give way. At most, if they really felt bad, they could treat each other to a meal later. The conversation didn't last long. Chu Yueqiang nodded at Kang Xinmu and didn't say anything else. Everyone was paying full attention to the situation of the giant statue in the center. No one knew what the rules were going to be. Before anyone could react, a spatial vortex had suddenly appeared around each of their bodies, and a total of 15 spatial vortexes had appeared around them. Then, before any of the 15 of them could react, they were swallowed by the spatial vortex. At this moment, everyone was panicking. But soon, they calmed down. After being devoured by the spatial vortex, everyone discovered that they had arrived in an independent, alternate space. In this strange space, everyone else had disappeared, and only they were left. The flow of time in this alternate dimension has accelerated. When Kang Xinmu was swallowed by the spatial whirlpool, the ancestor demon god's consciousness immediately noticed this and its eyes lit up. What does this mean? Kang Xinmu asked as he observed his surroundings. This alternate dimension didn't look big, and it was dark all around. There didn't seem to be anything there, but according to the ancestor demon god, the flow of time had definitely accelerated. In other words, if Kang Xinmu stayed in this alternate dimension for a day, only 2 hours might have passed in the outside world. The accelerated flow of time means that you will have more time to cultivate and improve here. The ancestor demon god's consciousness made a guess. It's very likely that this is an inheritance space, and it's here to show you the inheritance of the owner of this intermediate relic. Whoever obtains the inheritance will be able to truly obtain the treasure of this intermediate relic. Obtain the inheritance? Kang Xinmu narrowed his eyes. That sounds like a big deal. It seems like this is indeed an inheritance ruin. The black dragon's consciousness appeared and transmitted its thoughts. The inheritance of the owner of this intermediate relic isn't weak. It might be able to replace the inheritance of the void human tribe that assisted in your cultivation. The inheritance of the void human tribe specialized in the study of spatial void power. However, the owner of this intermediate relic definitely had a better understanding of spatial void power than the inheritance of the void human tribe. Hey, old black dragon, which old fart do you think the owner of this intermediate relic is? The ancestor demon god's consciousness chuckled. To be able to leave behind an inheritance ruin, it's definitely not a human. It must be some ancient existence like us. The owner of this intermediate relic seems to have a good understanding of space. This level of spatial power alone isn't enough to form a complete inheritance. The black dragon's consciousness was a little cautious. You must be careful. The inheritance that will appear later will definitely not be weak. It might even possess some unimaginable abilities. Kang Xinmu nodded at this reminder. After approximately half an incense's time, a ray of light finally appeared in the dark, alternate space. However, the appearance of this ray of light caused Jiang Shenwu's heart to tense up. This was because this glimmer of light was the light of space splitting. The entire dark alternate dimension was actually split in half before his eyes. That's the power of this inheritance. Try to absorb it. The ancestor demon god's consciousness transmitted to him. Kang Xinmu frowned slightly. He looked at the glimmer of void power that had split the space in half and began to feel the power within it. Under normal circumstances, it would take at least a few years to obtain this kind of inheritance power. Therefore, this alternate dimension was a space that accelerated time. Only this way would the cultivators who entered this place have more time to comprehend this inheritance. Most of the cultivators who entered this place had already cultivated other inheritances. Therefore, if one wanted to obtain the void power of this inheritance, they would have to destroy their own cultivation base first. This was a huge challenge. Not everyone had the courage to destroy and rebuild. However, this was only for ordinary people. For Jiang Shenwu, if he wanted to obtain this inheritance power, all he had to do was devour it. Then, he would replace the void human tribe's void power inheritance with his own. After all, the inheritance power of this intermediate relic was similar to the void power inheritance of the void human tribe. In fact, it might even surpass the level of the void power inheritance of the void human tribe. Kang Xinmu still didn't know how to improve the void power inheritance of the void human tribe. However, if he could obtain the inheritance power of this intermediate relic, then Kang Xinmu's strength would rise to another level. At the very least, his perception of the power of space would reach an unprecedented level. The inheritance of the power of the starry sky. Kang Xinmu looked at the glimmer of light that contained the light of the starry sky. For some reason, this inheritance name appeared in his mind. Chapter 49-45. This was an opportunity for anyone, but at the same time, it was also a choice. Choosing the starry sky inheritance meant removing the power of the divine dragon's inheritance and starting from scratch. If one didn't choose the starry sky inheritance, then this mid-grade relic would pretty much end here. In ancient times, there weren't so many races. Basically, those who cultivated all sorts of inheritances would improve and fight together. The demon god chuckled. Back then, it was very normal to change to other inheritances, but now. TSK, with the current racial environment, it's basically impossible to change the way one cultivates one inheritance. There are a total of 15 people who have obtained this opportunity. In my opinion, I'm afraid that no more than 3 people will choose to cultivate the power of the starry sky. Moreover, that includes you, Jiang Shenwu. That's not necessarily true. At this moment, the black dragon's consciousness suddenly interjected. Have you noticed that there's a kind of power in the starry sky inheritance space? A power that's unique in the world. That's right. Little demon god, you've lived too late. You don't know about some of the heaven-defying existences of our era. This power is called the 10,000 fusion power and originates from the legendary 10,000 fusion stone. At this point, the demon god's ancestor was suddenly shocked. It was clear that the 10,000 fusion power released by the 10,000 fusion stone was very impressive. Kang Xinmu wasn't sure what was going on. He only heard the demon god's consciousness transmit, I've naturally heard of the 10,000 fusion power of the 10,000 fusion stone, but I haven't had much contact with it. After all, I don't need it. It said that it's for cultivators who cultivate all sorts of inheritances. If you can obtain the 10,000 fusion power, a cultivator can obtain 2 or even more inheritances at the same time. Of course, if you want to obtain the third type of inheritance, you'll need too much all fusion power. That's basically impossible to achieve now. At the end of the day, the 10,000 fusion power of the 10,000 fusion stone could allow cultivators to cultivate many inheritances at the same time. This surprised Kang Xinmu. There was the 10,000 fusion power in the starry sky inheritance space. This was out of Kang Xinmu's expectations. However, even the demon god ancestor's consciousness didn't notice it. Only the even more ancient and powerful black dragon's consciousness noticed it. This made Kang Xinmu feel rather gratified. In any case, even one of the big bosses didn't know about its existence, so it was understandable that Kang Xinmu didn't know about it. Power of myriad fusion. At this moment, the black dragon's consciousness sensed the all-fusion power within the astral inheritance space and seemed to have fallen into some memories. Kang Xinmu couldn't help but have a guess. His devouring power could devour any kind of power, and it even allowed him to cultivate so many inherited powers at the same time. Could it be related to this all-fusion power? Or could it be that the power of devouring was inherited from the power of all-fusion? No, it can't be like this. This devouring power seems to be the most evil power in the universe. If it's related to the power of all-fusion, the most likely possibility is that this devouring power has devoured the power of all-fusion before, so it possesses a certain characteristic of the power of all-fusion? This guess was rather bold, and it was the closest to the truth. After all, no matter how much Kang Xinmu thought about it, this possibility was very high. Of course, no matter what, the inheritance space of the astral inheritance space contained the all-fusion power. This meant that the final 15 people who could enter this trial, and even more cultivators from other batches, would have the opportunity to directly cultivate the inheritance of the astral inheritance. This was a little too competitive. I have to quickly finish cultivating the astral inheritance. It's very likely that the inheritance of the astral inheritance can only be given to one person, but it's also possible that the rewards are given according to the order of comprehension. No matter what, I can't give up this opportunity. For Kang Xinmu, cultivating the inheritance of the astral inheritance was simply a heaven-sent opportunity. If it was someone else, he might have a lot of concerns. After all, they didn't know that this space contained the all-fusion power that could allow them to cultivate the astral inheritance. Most people probably had the same opinion as Kang Xinmu. If they wanted to cultivate the astral inheritance space, they would have to abolish their original inherited power. Therefore, there should be many people who had made up their minds to cultivate the astral inheritance space. It was likely that many people would give up this opportunity. That would be too much of a pity. I hope that Gu Xinyue and the others won't give up this opportunity, Kang Xinmu thought to himself. The astral inheritance space was an opportunity, but who would seize this opportunity? Who would risk the possibility of their original inherited power being abolished to seize this opportunity? Probably very few. Kang Xinmu didn't know who would make the choice now. Right now, he could only take care of himself and let himself complete the cultivation of the astral inheritance space. Immediately afterward, Kang Xinmu eliminated the distracting thoughts in his mind and began to release his own devouring power. It began to envelop the surrounding astral inheritance space. Since this astral inheritance space power was the power of inheritance, it naturally contained a lot of information. This information was about how to use the astral inheritance space power, how to condense it, and how to improve it. Although it was called the astral inheritance space power, it was actually a type of spatial void power. This power was extremely powerful in terms of spatial perception. It was amazing. Once successfully cultivated, one would surpass all the powerhouses of the void human tribe in the same realm. It was even possible for one to surpass them by 3 to 5 realms. This was a qualitative leap in terms of spatial perception. Jiang Shenwu released his devouring power. Immediately after, he continuously devoured the surrounding starry sky power into his body. This brought along with it a lot of comprehensions and insights from the starry sky power inheritance, as well as an explanation of how to use the starry sky power. These knowledge-related things were all like being imbued with wisdom, sinking into Jiang Shenwu's mind. At the same time, a very comfortable power began to wander around him. This should be the all-fusion power. The all-fusion power made people feel very comfortable. After it entered Kang Xinmu's body, he felt relaxed as if he had been relieved of a burden. This feeling was a special characteristic of the all-fusion power. In this state, cultivators could completely cultivate 2 types of inherited power at the same time. For others, the all-fusion power was the key. It allowed them to not need to remove the inherited power that they had cultivated. Whether it was the Bone Imperial clan's inheritance, the Dragon God clan's inheritance, or the Demon God clan's inheritance, no one would want to remove them. Therefore, the all-fusion power was the key. Of course, As for how this inheritance space determined whether a cultivator was willing to cultivate the astral inheritance space and actively release the all-fusion power, Kang Xinmu had no idea. Chapter 49-46. Kang Xinmu began to devour the power of the starry sky. He even devoured the power of all fusion. This was beneficial to him, and extremely beneficial. Moreover, this benefit shocked even the demon god ancestor. It should be noted that Kang Xinmu originally cultivated the inheritance of the dragon god tribe and the demon god tribe. These two inheritances were complete inheritances, and his cultivation speed was the same as ordinary cultivators. However, aside from these two inheritances, whether it was the inheritance of the heavenly deficient demonic dragon of ice and fire, or the inheritance of the void human tribe's power of void, which was a supplementary cultivation inheritance, Kang Xinmu's cultivation speed was much slower than his main inheritance. Now that Kang Xinmu was continuously absorbing the power of all fusion and the power of the starry sky, these two powers combined and directly integrated into Kang Xinmu's original power of void inheritance of the void human tribe. Together with the power of devouring, these four powers immediately underwent a strange change. During this change, the cultivation base of the power of void inheritance directly transformed into the cultivation base of the power of the starry sky. Moreover, Kang Xinmu discovered that the power of the starry sky inheritance actually became his main inheritance under the effect of the all-fusion power, and not a supplementary cultivation inheritance. This meant that Kang Xinmu's cultivation speed of the power of the starry sky inheritance would not be slower than others in the future. This was simply a great thing. Originally, Kang Xinmu did not particularly care about the power of void inheritance because it was a supplementary inheritance. Kang Xinmu only cultivated it to strengthen his perception and understanding of space. Now, this problem was easily solved. In the future, the inheritance of the starry sky could even be regarded as Kang Xinmu's main combat inheritance. Not to mention other things, just the spatial vortexes and void ripples released by the statues contained the power of the starry sky inheritance. They were extremely powerful techniques. If he could learn them, he could completely rely on them to fight above his level. In addition to Kang Xinmu's own strength, this way, Kang Xinmu's overall strength was simply strong to a point where there was no limit to it. At the very least, with the power of devouring, it was impossible for a cultivator of the same level to be a match for Kang Xinmu. Kang Xinmu did not spend much time cultivating the power of the starry sky inheritance. Basically, in this alternate dimension, Kang Xinmu only spent 3 days to devour a large portion of the starry sky power of inheritance in this alternate dimension, including the all-fusion power. Then, he converted all the void power in his body into the starry sky power of inheritance. 3 days later, Kang Xinmu finally completed the starry sky inheritance. At this moment, Kang Xinmu's starry sky inheritance was only at the 3rd level of the martial emperor realm. It was not realistic to use it to fight in this intermediate relic. But, Kang Xinmu soon discovered that after 3 days, when he had completely absorbed the power of the starry sky inheritance in the alternate dimension, another crack had appeared in the entire space. This crack contained an incomparably rich power of the starry sky inheritance. This made Kang Xinmu overjoyed. This meant that he could continue cultivating here. At present, he had not found a way to leave this alternate dimension. After thinking about it, Kang Xinmu felt that the inheritance was not over yet. In this case, he would continue to stay in this alternate dimension and cultivate the starry sky inheritance. As for how long it would take. As for Jiang Shenwu, he wasn't sure. Soon, Kang Xinmu continued to devour the power of the starry sky inheritance, allowing his starry sky inheritance to reach the 5th level of the martial emperor realm. At this level, Kang Xinmu felt that he could not consolidate the power of the starry sky inheritance very well. Previously, when he was at the 3rd level of the martial emperor realm, Kang Xinmu had directly transformed it because he had the void inheritance of the void human race. Therefore, there was no problem with consolidating his power. Now that he had advanced 2 levels in a row, he had to consolidate his power. Just as Kang Shinmu finished devouring the power of the starry sky inheritance in this crack in the void, suddenly, the darkness in this alternate dimension condensed into a giant dark beast. The appearance of this giant dark beast made Kang Shinmu narrow his eyes. This thing is used to train us, right? So that we can use the power of the starry sky inheritance to consolidate our cultivation. Kang Shinmu realized the purpose of this intermediate relic and began to use the power of the starry sky inheritance to deal with this giant dark beast. It was worth mentioning that when Kang Shinmu broke through to the 5th level of the starry sky inheritance, he found that the power of the starry sky inheritance had some cultivation methods of the starry sky inheritance. This kind of martial technique was not what Kang Shinmu wanted to call a starry sky martial technique. Rather, it was called a starry sky martial technique. It was the information passed down from the starry sky inheritance in the intermediate relic. These were 2 kinds of starry sky martial techniques. One was an offensive martial technique, and the other was a defensive martial technique. They were called Void Star Wave and Star Rune respectively. Void Star Wave was one of the few starry sky inheritances that could be used by martial emperors. It could be said that the lower limit of the starry sky inheritance was the martial emperor realm. Below the martial emperor realm, one basically had no combat effectiveness. Only after reaching the martial emperor realm could one cultivate the 2 starry sky martial techniques, Void Star Wave and Star Rune. Each of these 2 starry sky martial techniques was an extremely tyrannical existence. They were even more tyrannical than the high-grade divine spirit dragon martial technique. If the Void Star Wave was cultivated to its peak state, Kang Shinmu could already feel that it would surpass his 9th stage extreme Dao Hui dragon burst. Star Rune was a defensive starry sky martial technique. Its defensive power was definitely not inferior to the Great Sorrow Heavenly Dragon Seal. Moreover, its principle was to use the space runes of the starry sky universe to transfer the opponent's attack power. This method could be said to be impossible to guard against. Even when facing an opponent far stronger than oneself, the Star Rune could reduce most of the opponent's attack power, allowing one to bear a smaller amount of force. Of course, the most important thing about this starry sky inheritance is that one does not need to transform into the body of the starry sky inheritance, nor do they need to summon the shadow of the starry sky inheritance, totems, and the like. They can be used in the state of one's own divine dragon body. In other words, this starry sky inheritance was a kind of force of nature inheritance a long time ago, and does not need to carry a special body or shadow state. Kang Shinmu did not particularly understand this, and the consciousness of the demon god ancestor was also not very clear about this. But the consciousness of the black dragon knew this point and directly explained, this kind of inheritance power, in my era, is called the force of nature. It is considered as a power created and excavated by the human race, so there is no need to rely on the body of the demon god dragon god. It is different from other inheritances. This explanation made Kang Shinmu nod. So that's how it was. Humans in ancient times did not need to rely on the inheritance of those magical creatures to have their own powerful strength, that is the force of nature. Chapter 49-47. This was the first time Kang Shinmu had heard of the force of nature. However, this thing had already disappeared, so it was normal not to know about it. The body of the dragon god clan is incomparably huge. The body of the demon god clan is also incomparably huge. Humans who use the force of nature rely on the human body to erupt with power comparable to the divine dragon and the demon god. This is the force of nature. Kang Shinmu now understood this point. Thinking about it, he was somewhat yearning for it. In other words, the space attribute force of void of the starry sky inheritance did not require a huge body to control. Kang Shinmu could use and control this power even without transforming into the body of a divine dragon. This was a very novel thing. After all, the power that Kang Xinmu came into contact with before was the power of inheritance. Whether it was the inheritance of the Demon God clan, the inheritance of the Dragon God clan, or the other inheritance of the Star God clan, the Bone Imperial clan, the Virtual Human clan, and so on, they all needed to condense a huge body that did not belong to them in order to exert their full strength. The space attribute force of void of the Starry Sky inheritance was completely different from these powers. In any case, Jiang Shenwu had already mastered the power of the Starry Sky inheritance at level 5 of the Emperor class. Moreover, because he had devoured the power of the Starry Sky inheritance, he had already mastered the initial mastery of the Void Starwave and Cosmic Rune. Of course, it was not something that could be done in a short period of time if he wanted to use these two martial skills with ease and proficiency. Because among the power of the Starry Sky inheritance, there was no high-level application of these two martial skills, at least not among the power of the Starry Sky inheritance. Therefore, it was useless for Kang Xinmu to devour more. However, he was able to grasp these two martial skills to a higher level through close combat. At this moment, the giant dark beast appeared. It was Kang Xinmu's training opponent. Moreover, during the training process, Kang Xinmu directly removed his divine dragon form, intending to use the star inheritance in his human form. This method made Kang Xinmu feel quite excited. After all, this was his first time fighting in his human form. This was not a one-sided battle, but a battle between evenly matched opponents. It was rare for one to fight in the form of a human, but Jiang Shenwu was doing it now. All of this was because of the power of the Starry Sky inheritance. Kang Xinmu had a vague feeling that if he fought in his human form, he would be able to grasp the Starry Sky's inheritance and martial techniques much faster. Although the existence of the divine dragon body was very strong, it would hinder his perception and control of the inheritance power of the Starry Sky. Immediately after, Kang Xinmu's void starwave erupted. He just raised his hand and pinched, and several void ripples spread out from his fist to the surroundings. After extending out, they hit the body of the giant dark beast. The giant dark beast roared when it was attacked and rushed towards Kang Xinmu. Along the way, terrifying black wind and clouds roared and rolled. Star Rune. Kang Xinmu's defensive Starry Sky martial skill erupted, and then several mysterious patterns directly flickered and lit up in the space, just like the patterns on the statue. 3 mysterious patterns lit up at the same time, forming a layer of Starry Sky power barrier. The appearance of this barrier directly blocked the giant dark beast. This giant dark beast is at best at the 5th level of the Martial Emperor level. Oh no, it's equivalent to the 5th level of the Martial Emperor level. In the outside world, I'm afraid it can compete with an ordinary 7th level Martial Emperor level expert. However, I don't have to use the power of the Divine Dragon inheritance now. Just by relying on this Starry Sky power, I can resist the attack of the giant dark beast and even pose a threat to it. This was the power of the Starry Sky inheritance. As Kang Xinmu fought with the giant dark beast, the number of his star runes that could light up increased. However, the number of these star runes that lit up was not necessarily better. Not only did it require a large number, but it also needed to be of high quality. White, silver, and gold. These were the 3 colors of the star runes. White was the most common star rune, silver was about twice as powerful as white, and gold was at least 5 times more powerful than white. Currently, Kang Xinmu's comprehension ability of the Starry Sky inheritance was still unable to summon the gold star runes. Even summoning the silver star runes was very difficult. All this was because the grade of his Starry Sky inheritance was not high enough. However, it didn't matter. Anyway, Kang Xinmu had the devouring power. As long as he continued to cultivate in this accelerated inheritance space, his attainments in the Starry Sky inheritance would definitely increase at a terrifying speed. While Kang Xinmu was improving his cultivation in the accelerated inheritance space, outside their independent space. Many cultivators had already gathered in a large hall. The people in this hall seemed to have already experienced the three teams' test of the giant statue. It wasn't just Murong Lieni and Jing Luo's teams. There were a total of more than 20 people in this hall. Currently, besides these 20 people in Kang Xinmu's team that was still in the inheritance space, the other 100 people had already left the intermediate ruins. They had either died in the ruins or left early. At this moment, these 20 people were chatting. Among them were Quan Tianqing and his friends from the North Pole tribe. The two of them didn't seem to have tried the Starry Sky inheritance power and directly left. After all, they didn't know about the existence of the all-fusion power. What are we doing here? Is there a follow-up test? To be honest, even the inheritance has been released. The intermediate ruins test should be over. What a pity. The intermediate ruins test is not bad. The rewards are quite generous. Not bad. I obtained materials worth more than 300,000 demon shinbi. This trip was not in vain. Demon shinbi was the demon god tribe's common currency, just like gold dragon coins. Its purchasing power was about the same as gold dragon coins. Under normal circumstances, the exchange rate was 1-to-1. Most of the people present felt that the exploration of the intermediate ruins should be over. However, Yuhan and Quan Tianqing were a little puzzled as they stood together. Kang Xinmu didn't appear here. Did he choose to cultivate that inheritance power? Is he planning to give up his dragon god tribe cultivation? Chapter 49-48. But all in all, it seemed useless for them to stay here. After waiting for a few days, nothing unusual happened. Therefore, this group of people could only choose to withdraw from the ruins after a few days. When this group of people withdrew, there were only 7 people left in the entire ruins, including Kang Xinmu. Kang Xinmu was one of them. What Kang Xinmu did not know was that there were 2 people he knew. One was Gu Xinyue, and the other was Chu Yueqiang. Of course, these were not mentioned for the time being. Among the 7 people, in addition to Kang Xinmu and the 2 women, there was also Yuhan from the Bone Imperial family. As for the other 3 people, they were all from the Demon God clan, including Su Yi. In addition to Su Yi, there were 2 Demon God clan powerhouses that Kang Xinmu had never seen before. Of course, Kang Xinmu and the others did not know how many people were currently cultivating the power of the Starry Sky inheritance. The independent space that they were in was completely independent of this world, existing in a corner of the intermediate ruins, and continued quietly. Time passed. Outside the intermediate ruins. Except for more than 20 people who died in the intermediate ruins, the others had basically come out. Now, everyone had basically completely understood the test of the intermediate ruins. It was nothing more than attacking some statues. For the truly capable teams, it was not a problem at all. The biggest problem was the problem of grouping when they first entered. During the grouping process, if they found that there was someone in their team that they did not like, then the exploration of the intermediate ruins would basically be ruined. All the supreme powerhouses gathered together and were chatting. As for the others, they were chatting on the side. Many of the cultivators who had obtained more rewards from the intermediate ruins were now very excited to show off and communicate with their elders. This time, the intermediate ruins could be said to be a great harvest. Every race that participated in this event earned a lot of money. It could be said that even the Dragon God clan and the ancient Phoenix clan, which had the least number of people entering, had at least 1 million gold dragon coins worth of resources. The ancient Phoenix clan had already calculated the total income of at least 1.2 million spirit stones. However, this wasn't too much. The main thing was that the demon god race had really earned a lot this time. Although they had lost many demon god race geniuses for this operation, they had obtained at least 7 to 8 million cultivation resources. Most importantly, the surviving demon god race geniuses had a stronger perception and control of the spatial attribute. This would be of great benefit to their future cultivation. This kind of benefit was the real treasure of the exploration of the intermediate ruins. Therefore, the supreme experts of the various races were all smiling. It was a common occurrence for geniuses to die. Of course, even though there was no need to grieve over it, it still caused one to sigh with emotion. Of course, there were some supreme experts who couldn't even laugh. Among them was Emperor Xi of the Dragon Gods. Emperor Xi's brows were tightly furrowed. One had to know that out of the 5 dragon warriors, only 2 had come out. Shengguan Dai, and Tan Shoujua had already come out. These 2 were eliminated at the critical moment and the 3 teams were competing for the statue. It was because someone in the team made a mistake and was killed. Among them, Shengguan Dai, was only a hair's breadth away from death. Fortunately, she survived. But because of this, she had also gained a lot. At least compared to most people, she had gained a lot more. Of course, there was no way to compare with Kang Xinmu, but at least there was a resource reward worth more than 100,000 gold dragon coins. But besides Shengguan Dai, and Tan Shoujua, Kang Xinmu, Gu Xinyue, and Chu Yueqiang didn't come out. Emperor Xi couldn't help but feel a little puzzled and worried. Fortunately, Murong Lieni and Huang Yun had a good relationship with Kang Xinmu. Therefore, Murong Lieni and Huang Yun went to find Emperor Xi together and told him that Kang Xinmu, Gu Xinyue, and Chu Yueqiang had performed quite well at the last checkpoint. They should be in the last inheritance space now. Inheritance space? What are they doing in the inheritance space? Don't they want the inheritance power of the dragon gods? Emperor Xi was a little confused about this, but she was also a little anxious. To be honest, she really thought highly of Kang Xinmu. But if Kang Xinmu destroyed his cultivation as the inheritor of the dragon gods, it would be like a bolt from the blue. If that happened, Emperor Xi didn't know how to treat Kang Xinmu. In this environment where races were divided by inheritance, once Kang Xinmu gave up his identity as the inheritor of the dragon gods, he would probably be looked down upon wherever he went. And as a supreme cultivator, no matter how much Emperor Xi admired Kang Xinmu, it would be extremely difficult for her to help Kang Xinmu. Therefore, after hearing Murong Lieni and Huang Yun's words, Emperor Xi was a little restless. Generally speaking, the exploration of a mid-level relic lasted for 2 months. After 2 months, the relic would basically be closed. And now, it had only been less than 7 days since the opening of the mid-level relic. There was still so much time left. More than one person was puzzled. Could it be that in just 7 days, everyone had explored the entire mid-level relic? This felt a little unreal. And as the days passed, in addition to those who had died, there were still 7 people who did not appear from the relic. Kang Xinmu, Chu Yueqiang, and Gu Xinyue were among these 7 people. Of course, Suyi from the Demon God clan and Yuhan from the Bone Imperial clan were also among them. Only the Ancient Phoenix clan and the North Star tribe were safe and sound. However, although the surviving people of the Ancient Phoenix clan and the North Star tribe had come out, their supreme cultivators still had no intention of leaving. In the eyes of the supreme cultivators, this mid-level relic was a little strange. The resources came too quickly and too easily. In just 7 days, everyone had brought out things worth more than 10 million. And finally, there were still 7 people who had not come out. Among these 7 people, there were several people who had been the focus of attention before. Among these 7 people were Kang Xinmu and Su Yi. These 2 people had shown brilliantly in the arena battle, so naturally, they were the focus of attention. Apart from these 2, the other 5 people who had not come out were also constantly being inquired about and recorded. This was because everyone now knew that in the end, after passing the test of the giant statue in the center, everyone would be teleported to an alternate dimension. There was some kind of power inheritance in that alternate dimension. It should be the power that the owner of the intermediate relic wanted them to cultivate. Unfortunately, most people did not even consider it at all and directly gave up. Although this mysterious power of inheritance was very attractive, in a situation where most information was unknown, most people would not give up the power of inheritance that they had cultivated for decades. Chapter 49-49. Although this kind of mysterious inheritance power was very attractive, most people would not give up the inheritance power that they had cultivated for decades when most of the information was unknown. Under such circumstances, many people were directly sent out of the alternate space. The 7 people who were still in the relic should have accepted and wanted to cultivate the inheritance of the power of the starry sky, right? Everyone was waiting for the 7 of them. Whether they gave up their own inheritance or not, once they all cultivated the power of the starry sky successfully, it would be a brand new school, a brand new inheritance, and it might even become a brand new race. Nowadays, races were talking about inheritance. A brand new inheritance power was naturally very important. Everyone wanted to know how strong the inheritance power was. The influence of this mid-level relic exploration might even be greater than everyone imagined. Also, for the practitioners who gave up their original inheritance power and cultivated other inheritances, the major races treated them differently. If they directly changed to cultivate the inheritance of another race, it would basically be regarded as betrayal, and they would naturally be hunted down by the original race. But this situation was not the same as normal situations. There had been precedents before. In some inheritance relics, a practitioner obtained a brand new inheritance, and then the practitioner who obtained the inheritance would basically be controlled by the clan. There had been such a situation before, and then the practitioner who obtained a brand new inheritance ran out to create a new force. In the end, they even called themselves a clan. This could be said to be an independent clan. And the dragon gods and demon gods naturally would not allow such a situation to happen. Once Kong Shinmu and the others obtained a brand new power, they would definitely be controlled by the higher-ups of the dragon gods. Even if they were not hostile to them, they still needed to control their power to ensure that they were still used by the dragon gods. These were the basic policies of the races, and there was nothing to say. Not only the dragon gods, but all the other races had the same attitude. For such a thing this time, in fact, the major supreme masters had already reported it back to the higher-ups of their races. Now it must have attracted the attention of the higher-ups of the major races. Strictly speaking, the impact of such a thing was even greater than the unearthing of the heaven and earth holy treasure. It was even possible that other races would come to poach people. This situation was not unheard of. Everything had to wait for Kong Shinmu and the others to come out of the inheritance relics. The state of Kong Shinmu and the others, and their achievements, could even affect the current balance among the major races. At this moment, Kong Shinmu and the others were wholeheartedly cultivating. Among the 7 of them, Kong Shinmu's cultivation speed was definitely the fastest. In fact, his speed was more than 3 times faster than the others. This was the power of the devouring power. A month after the intermediate ruins opened in the outside world, Kong Shinmu and the others had already spent 3 years in the alternate dimension. During this 1 year, it could be said that Kong Shinmu had been constantly improving his starry sky inheritance power. Although it had been 3 years, these 3 years were still too tight for Kong Shinmu. This was because the inheritance power of the starry sky was very profound and mysterious. Even if the devouring power directly swallowed it, it would still be very difficult to fully understand it. From consolidating the power of the 5th level of the royal family to the peak of the 9th level of the royal family, and along the way, constantly consolidating the power of the starry sky inheritance power. Kong Shinmu had hardly rested for 3 years. And all this hard work was fruitful. Kong Shinmu's starry sky inheritance had directly reached the 9th level of the royal class. Moreover, his understanding and perception of the void star wave and the starry sky runes had exceeded the initial level by more than 100 times. The current Kong Shinmu could barely summon and release the golden starry sky runes. He also knew the combination of several starry sky runes to make it erupt with the strongest power. The starry sky runes, the most basic defensive starry sky martial technique, but in fact, it was an omnipotent martial technique, mainly relying on the mastery of the starry sky runes. If one was proficient in the mastery of the starry sky runes, this starry sky martial technique could be said to be a combination of attack, defense, speed, void, all types of martial techniques into one super powerful martial technique. The key was the combination of the starry sky runes. Even some of the white starry sky runes had a special combination effect. To understand these things, it was far from what could be achieved in 3 years. Even 30 years might not be enough to integrate them. In any case, now that Kong Shinmu had been busy for 3 years, he finally had a good understanding of the starry sky runes, and many of the techniques were at his fingertips. He had also calculated a little. Now, if he purely used the starry sky inheritance to fight against his divine dragon form, after excluding the special devouring power, his divine dragon form would not even be a match for the starry sky inheritance power. This was too amazing. As for the void star wave, Kong Shinmu later discovered that it could be manipulated through the starry sky runes. The more the starry sky runes were mastered, the more perfect it was, and the more different kinds of void star wave could be erupted, and even the void star wave could change the flow of time. These were all possible, all of these were the power of the starry sky runes. And the void star wave was the simplest means of manipulating the starry sky runes to attack. If other starry sky runes were added, some special effects could be added to this attack. The twists and turns were extremely complicated, and there was no need to elaborate. In short, now Kong Shinmu was very satisfied with the improvement over the past 3 years. And he also knew that 3 years in the alternate dimension was only equivalent to half a month in the outside world. From the time Kong Shinmu and the others entered the intermediate ruins to the alternate dimension, half a month had passed. In other words, the intermediate ruins have been open for a month now? Then there is still 1 month left. This starry sky remnant will definitely not end like this. There have been many team competitions before, and now, I believe it is also a competition. I don't know if there are others who are cultivating the starry sky inheritance power, but the first to cultivate the starry sky inheritance power to the peak of the imperial family will definitely be able to get some better treasures. It may even be the starry sky, that sacred heaven and earth grade spatial treasure. Chapter 49-50. Kong Shinmu thought to himself. Then, as his starry sky inheritance reached the 9th level of the Emperor tier, he fought fiercely with the dark beasts of the same level and completely consolidated his power. Jiang Shenwu found that he had finally come out of the accelerated alternate dimension. His surroundings suddenly changed. 3 years of unchanging things suddenly changed at this moment, which really made people sigh with emotion. In fact, Kong Shinmu and the others had only been missing for half a month to the outside world. Kong Shinmu squinted his eyes, and the light in front of him was so dazzling that he could not open his eyes. He had been in darkness for 3 years, and now that he suddenly saw light, it was natural for him to be like this. What appeared in front of Kong Shinmu was a long crystal corridor, and on both sides of this crystal corridor were statues. These statues were the same size as a normal human, and the corridor was also for humans to pass through. Whether it was the body of the demon god or the body of the dragon god, none of them could pass through this crystal corridor. It seems that I was the first to come to this corridor. Kong Shinmu looked around, but did not see anyone's shadow. Now he still did not know who, like him, had chosen to cultivate the power of the starry sky inheritance, and it was even possible that he was the only one. The road ahead was only possible to cultivate the power of the starry sky inheritance to the peak of the Emperor stage. Therefore, Kang Xinmu knew that a bigger reward was yet to come. Come on, let's go through the crystal corridor first. Kang Xinmu directly took action. However, as soon as he stepped into the crystal corridor, he found that the statues on both sides of the corridor suddenly seemed to come to life. On each statue, incomparable star runes were flashing. These star runes lit up with a light blue light, and then became brighter and brighter, as if condensing a kind of destructive power. Kang Xinmu felt that this power was probably comparable to that of a supreme expert. In other words, among the practitioners who were allowed to enter this intermediate relic, no one could resist this level of attack power. Fortunately, after 3 years of nurturing, Kang Xinmu had a sufficient understanding of the power of the Starry Sky inheritance and the cosmic runes. When he saw the starry runes on the statues around him light up, he gathered his power according to the shape of the starry runes. Every time he passed by a statue, Kang Xinmu would gather the power of the Starry Sky inheritance in his body and form an identical starry rune. Then, after the 2 identical cosmic runes cancelled each other out, the statue returned to its original position. This was a little like a decryption. Without 3 years of study and comprehension, it was impossible for anyone to pass through this crystal corridor. If a supreme expert tried to force his way through, he would definitely not be able to obtain anything in the end. Don't assume that supreme power was invincible. In fact, many owners of intermediate relics and even elementary relics were all top-notch supreme powerhouses. And now, many of the supreme experts were just ordinary supreme experts. Although they were all supreme experts, there was naturally a difference. At the very least, it was not an exaggeration to say that any one of those supreme experts who could leave a relic in the chaos battlefield could beat up dozens or even hundreds of the so-called supreme experts now. There were once supreme experts who wanted to force their way into some low-level relics. As a result, they were directly blasted into pieces by the power of the relics. After several times, no one was able to successfully break into the interior of the relic. They could only proceed according to the rules set by the owner of the relic, allowing practitioners whose cultivation was not higher than a certain level to enter. So now, many people were very obedient in front of the relics. With every step Kang Xinmu took on the crystal corridor, he needed to condense a starry rune. After 100 steps, Kang Xinmu directly stepped on a crystal floor, and then the surrounding scene suddenly changed, turning into a deep and dark starry sky. In this dark starry sky, Kang Xinmu could feel a lot of elements of the power of the Starry Sky inheritance, which were evenly distributed in this space. Where is this? Kang Xinmu was a little confused. But feeling the surrounding aura, the black dragon's consciousness and the demon god ancestor's consciousness suddenly became excited and excited. This is the sacred item of heaven and earth. The spatial treasure that you've seen before. You're now inside this spatial treasure of heaven and earth. Hearing this, Kang Xinmu's expression changed slightly. This was the interior of a sacred item of heaven and earth? This time, even the black dragon's consciousness was a little excited, and it didn't seem to be fake. In that case, didn't that mean that he was facing the test of obtaining this sacred item of heaven and earth? All of a sudden, at the end of the darkness in front of Kang Xinmu, a fiery red ball of light appeared. The fiery red ball of light shone down, directly illuminating half of the dark space. What appeared in front of Kang Xinmu was an endless plain. On this plain, there were countless plants, mountains, and rivers, all revolving like a small world. The fiery red ball of light in front of him was like a sun. Or perhaps Kang Xinmu now knew that it was a sun-shaped gem, one of the 2 gems of the world stone. It represented the sun that created the world. As the sun-shaped gem rose, Kang Xinmu saw that there were many creatures living on this plain. These creatures looked harmless, docile, and herbivorous, living on this plain. And now, Kang Xinmu knew that thousands of miles below this plain was another continent. That continent was inhabited by many ferocious carnivorous creatures. At certain times, this plane would be connected to the other continent, and those ferocious creatures could directly come to this plane to hunt for food. This was a natural ecological world that had been deposited in the ruins of the 7th region of the chaotic battlefield for a long time and had continued to develop until now. Because of the existence of the sun-shaped gem and the moon-shaped gem, this world had continued to develop to this day and was still full of vitality. Outside these two continents are 12 layers of star inscriptions. These 12 layers of inscriptions have already been sealed and require a vast amount of cultivation resources to unlock. The Black Dragon's consciousness calmly reminded, this is a small world, and a spatial treasure with extremely powerful combat abilities. I suggest that you don't hand it over to anyone. Chapter 49-51. Of course, the premise is that you can get this small world. Starry Sky. The Starry Sky small world was also a sacred treasure. This sacred treasure was a super existence with 12 layers of engravings. It was much more powerful than the existing sacred treasures. Although the resources needed to unlock the 3 layers of engravings were certainly amazing, the benefits it brought were also extremely enviable. As everyone knew, the power of a sacred treasure was closely related to the number of layers of engravings unlocked. Generally, a sacred treasure had at most 9 layers of engravings. After these 9 layers of engravings were all unlocked, the sacred treasure would have the power equivalent to a top supreme master. So, what if 3 more layers of engravings were unlocked? The power would be unimaginable. In short, as long as Kong Shinmu could unlock all 12 layers of engravings, he could completely surpass the Dragon God clan. No matter how many people the Dragon God clan sent, he was not afraid. Even if all the Supreme Masters came together, it would be impossible to break this Starry Sky small world. Of course, as a sacred treasure, it still had a specific problem. That was, its energy was limited, and it was impossible to release unlimited power. But this sacred treasure was also a small world, and there were sun-shaped gems and moon-shaped gems in the small world. The existence of these 2 gems could provide unlimited energy to the entire small world. So, this was almost the most perfect sacred treasure, a divine artifact that could really create a large race. If Kong Shinmu had this Starry Sky small world, with the Starry Sky small world as the foundation, he could completely open up his own big force. Maybe, I can let the Devouring Dragon Regiment's team come here. Kong Shinmu thought. Anyway, inside this sacred treasure was a small world, a Starry Sky small world, and humans could live in it. The opening of the 12 layers of engravings did not affect the survival of the creatures in this Starry Sky small world. The only thing to pay attention to was that the group of bloodthirsty creatures on the other side of the plane seemed to be strong. But this could be used to train the members of the Devouring Dragon Regiment. Kong Shinmu did not know the strength of that group of bloodthirsty creatures, so he had to consult the consciousness of the 2 seniors in his mind. In terms of identifying the strength of creatures, these 2 seniors were obviously better than Kong Shinmu. At most, it's at the peak of the Emperor realm. It's already the king of those bloodthirsty creatures. That's right. Basically, they are all king and initial stage emperors. At most, they are middle stage and peak emperors. Those bloodthirsty creatures follow a rule. That is, the creatures in the small worlds can't break through to the transcendent God level, unless they can leave the small worlds. These words were heard by Kong Shinmu and remained in his heart. Clearly, there was an invisible barrier in the small world that prevented the creatures inside from breaking through to the transcendent level. However, supreme God-level existences could enter the small world. In other words, after reaching the peak of the Emperor level, they had to leave the small world in order to advance to the next level. Kong Shinmu had never heard of this before. Since the strongest bloodthirsty creatures were only at the peak of Emperor tier, it meant that Kong Shinmu could completely control the situation. It wouldn't be a problem for the members of the Devouring Dragon group to train here. Of course, the The prerequisite for all of this was that Kang Shinmu was able to obtain this small starry sky world. What do I have to do to obtain this small starry sky world? Kang Shinmu was a little puzzled. The Black Dragon's consciousness and the demon god ancestor's consciousness were also helping him investigate the situation. Soon, the Black Dragon's consciousness transmitted its thoughts. It seems that you don't have to do anything special. Your previous performance, in addition to your current understanding of the power of the Starry Sky inheritance, has already been recognized by this mid-grade relic. In other words, as long as you stay in this small Starry Sky world, you can automatically absorb the world power of this small Starry Sky world. The two gems will recognize you as their master. In the future, this small Starry Sky world will be under your jurisdiction. How long would this process take? The Black Dragon's consciousness didn't say, but to Kang Shinmu, this sentence was enough. Now, let's carefully observe this small starry sky world. Kang Shinmu began to fly in human form in the small starry sky world, flying over the plains. Soon, he discovered that there were many human buildings hidden in the mountains and dense forests on the plains. These buildings looked like shrines, and every one of them was extremely sacred. However, they also appeared a little old and dilapidated. Of course, this didn't affect the importance that Kang Shinmu attached to these buildings. After all, Kang Shinmu had a human body and was very small. Now, he could easily enter the doors of these buildings. It was worth mentioning that these buildings looked very small, and were not prepared for the body of a divine dragon. Instead, they were prepared for humans. After all, this was the place of inheritance of the power of the starry sky that humans had mastered. Kang Shinmu could see that there were some cosmic runes on the doors of these buildings. Therefore, he condensed the corresponding cosmic runes and embedded their power into the patterns of the cosmic runes to open the doors of these buildings. After Kang Shinmu opened the doors of these buildings for the first time, the cosmic runes on the doors disappeared. Just like a password, it only appeared once. Later on, the person who opened the door for the first time had to remember the password before they could open the door. This was also to prevent others from entering by mistake. After entering a total of 12 shrines, Kang Shinmu found that there were some information about the inheritance of the power of the starry sky stored in these shrines. It also included some things to pay attention to in each stage of cultivation. From the king to the emperor to the transcendent to the supreme superior, there were all records. There was also some history about the inheritance of the power of the starry sky. In terms of history, Kang Shinmu was more interested because it was likely to outline the future of the ancient times. However, Kang Shinmu didn't have much time to look at it now. There weren't any precious cultivation resources in the 12 shrines. It could even be said that there were no cultivation resources at all. There were only records of cultivation methods. According to the information recorded, in order to obtain the cultivation resources of the power of the starry sky, one had to explore the underground of this small starry sky world. As for what would appear in the underground of this small starry sky world, Kang Shinmu didn't know. However, the ancestor of the demon god and the black dragon's consciousness guessed that there should be some tests in the plains of this small world. As long as one passed these tests, one could obtain more cultivation resources of the power of the starry sky.